Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you all had an amazing Christmas. I know I did. I got a few days off of work and got to spend some time with my family. And in today's video, I want to go over how to even out the exposure in your natural light portraits. One of the biggest questions I get asked is, what light did you use? Now, although I do use off-camera flash in most of my portraits, I get asked this even when it's a natural light portrait. Now, before we get started, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you get notifications when there's a new video. That really helps my channel grow and for me to keep the content free. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to do is you're going to notice that this looks a little bit underexposed, right? So I actually turned on the indicator up here to show me what was blown out. We do have a little area down here that has lost some detail, but it's not really a big deal. It hasn't lost too much detail, so I think we're okay there. Now, if you look down here, there's no shadows that are completely in black, which is good. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you're shooting for this. You're shooting to be able to pull all that detail out. I've said it in a couple of my other videos. You definitely want to shoot raw. Raw will give you the most detail, the most information, the most everything to be able to, push and pull and manipulate and do all that good stuff. So make sure you're shooting in raw. Now, with it being underexposed, the first thing we're going to do is we're still going to pull back these highlights a little bit here. And I don't need to really go too far down. Even though that looks like it's blown out, if I turn this indicator off, it's really not that big of a deal. So next thing we'll do is we'll bring up the shadows a little bit. And all the while I'm looking at my histogram here, making sure that I don't have anything crazy going on up here. And then I'll go ahead and pop the whites too. Now if I hold the Alt or the Option and then pull them up, I'm going to pull them up maybe to about right there. If I lose a little bit of detail, I'm okay with that. It's not that big of a deal. So instead of pulling the exposure up, because that'll pull everything, notice I pulled the shadows here and then also the blacks I'm going to pull way up. Pull that up to about 30. And it's still a little bit underexposed. So if I show you the before and after, looks a lot better, right? But we're not done yet. The biggest thing with editing is you want to basically take baby steps. You don't want to do everything all at once. You don't want to make any huge changes. It just doesn't look right if you do that. Now another thing that you may want to do is you may want to warm the image up a little bit. This was shot on auto white balance. And you can move your slider left and right and kind of see how you want it. I want mine a little bit warmer. Now if I go up here to this little eyedropper here, I can actually find like a white or gray spot and I can either click on it or I can click on it and pull. And I usually sample from, if I have the area to sample it from, I'll sample from a little bit bigger area there. Now that might be a little too green for my taste, so I'm going to take the tint and I'm going to just move it ever so slightly, about maybe 2 or 3 ticks there. And then we'll go over to our HSL adjustments. And then we'll take our yellows, because that's where the sky is. The sky is pretty much yellow and orange. Now I don't want to manipulate the orange, because orange and red, your skin tones are mainly in your orange and red. So you'll see if I pull the orange down, it does, pull down the background a little bit, but we can do that in a different step. because I don't want to mess with the skin tones. So I'll take the yellow, pull it down a little bit, and notice it's not really doing anything. If I pull it all the way down, it's not really doing anything to her face or her skin. So I can safely pull this down and it'll just affect the background. Blues, there's maybe just a hint of blue, and you can kind of play around with these. Notice I'm in the luminance tab here. You can play around with these a little bit and see what it affects, and you can push and pull however you want to do that. So I think that's actually good there. I'm not going to add any extra color or anything like that in here. We're going to do that later. So if I go back here, one thing that you'll notice in a lot of my videos, I like to pull back the clarity a little bit. So we'll pull that back to about 13, and that just kind of helps smooth out the skin a little bit. And then texture, we can maybe add a little bit of texture to bring some of that back. And again, I'm not going to really mess with the vibrance or the saturation or anything. We're going to add color later. And I may even pull back the contrast a little bit too. So contrast is going to be your difference between your lights and your darks. So if I pull it all the way up, see how it brightens some areas and darkens other areas. Now if I pull it back, it just kind of flattens it out a little bit. And that's kind of what we want, because we want something pretty even to start out with, and then we can add our own contrast later. So if I pull it back to about 23, 24, right around that area, that'll give me a little bit more to work with. I can do some sharpening in here. If you go over to your sharpening tab, I usually throw this up, since I do shoot at a pretty shallow depth of field. I'll throw this up about 75, 76, and then make sure I have the noise reduction up just a little bit, maybe to about 20, 25. If you zoom in, mainly you can look in the dark areas. There's really not a lot of noise. If I take this all the way back, there's really not a lot of noise, but there's always going to be some noise in there. So I'll just throw that up to maybe plus 20 just to get some of that noise out. Okay, and then the last tab we're going to go into is going to be the lens correction tab. Enable profile corrections. It automatically sets my lens here. It's the Sigma 105 1.4. And then I like the vignette, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that all the way back. I just want to do the lens distortion. So we'll go ahead and open our image in Photoshop. And then this is pretty much where all the magic's going to happen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to make this really, really simple. So if I go into my selection here, and I go to select subject, it's automatically going to select the model here, and then you can go in and fine tune it. If I zoom in a little bit, you'll see that it kind of missed a few areas here and there, but it's not perfect, but it'll give you a great starting point. And I'm using the quick selection tool here. You can feel free to use whatever tool you would rather use. And I'm just going to click in these areas where I know it missed. And now this doesn't have to be a perfect selection. It just has to be pretty close. You do want to make sure that you get pretty much all of the background out. If you go into the subject, it's okay if you go in just a little bit. So now that we have our selection, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go up to exposure, and I'm going to click on that, and it's going to create a mask. So if I hit the Alt or the Option key and click on it, you're going to see where my mask is at here. And I'll hit that again to revert back. So white is where it's going to be affected, and black is where it's not going to be affected. So now I'm going to click back over here on the exposure icon here, and I'm just going to bump this exposure up just a little bit, and I don't want to go too far because we're going to add a little bit more in later. So maybe like half a stop, somewhere around there, and that already looks better. So here's our before, here's our after, and that looks a little bit more even there. And then the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to go into my hue saturation, and we're not going to do a complete full edit, but I will show you a couple extra things here. So if I take this eyedropper here on the hue and saturation layer, if I click on that and then I click on a white area, it's showing me that there's blues in it. So I want to take those blues out of that area, but I don't want to take all the blues out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this hue slider, I'm going to slide it all the way over and take my saturation all the way up and see what it's affecting. And now I know it's only affecting these areas here. So we'll go ahead and take that back to 0. And then what I want to do is I want to take that saturation out. I'm not going to do it all the way, go back down to maybe like -77, bring the lightness up here. And then bringing up the lightness will also take a little bit of that color out. And then maybe if I click in, a couple other areas here, you'll notice if I click here, it's showing that there's reds in there. So we'll do the same thing here. And it doesn't look like there's really much there, so I'm not really too worried about that. And I think we're good to go on that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a curves adjustment layer. I'm going to pull up right in the middle here, just a little bit there, and then I'm going to hit Control or Command I on a Mac. I'm going to invert that. I'm going to grab my brush, hit B for brush, and then I'm going to take my flow down to about 15%, 16%, and I'm just going to brush a little bit of exposure on the face. And notice it didn't really do a whole lot, but it just brought a little bit of attention to the face. And next thing I'm going to do is we're going to go into dodge and burn. So I don't know that I've actually showed this at all. So what I do, there's a couple different ways you can do dodge and burn. You can use curves layers, or you can use a blank layer, or you can use a 50% gray layer. I like to just create a new layer, hit Shift Delete, change it to 50% gray, hit OK, and then I'm going to change it from normal to soft light. Soft light, what that does is anything that is 50% gray will be transparent. It's not going to do anything. Anything lighter than 50% gray, it's going to lighten. Anything darker than 50% gray, it's going to darken. So that's why we use a 50% gray layer, and then we take our flow all the way down to 1%, and then you paint on that layer with either black or white, and it'll lighten or darken whatever you're painting. So just to show you kind of an example, I'll go ahead and pull this up to about 45% or so, and I'll paint with white, and you can see what that does. See how it lightens it? Let's go back here, and then if I paint with black, see how it darkens it? So that's how we can control our lights and darks there. So go back here. So now all I'm looking to do is I'm going to switch it back to white, take my flow back down to about 1%. And then I'm just going to go over any areas that are that should be bright and paint with white. Just go over a couple passes. So, you know, the forehead here, the bridge of the nose, the cheeks here, maybe even a little bit on the eyes, and a little bit down here on the chin. And then when I do the close, I generally boost it up to about 6% or so. Same thing here. What I'm going to do is notice this this white line here. I'm just going to go over these brighter areas, and it may not look like I'm doing a whole lot right now, but when I show you the before and after, you're going to see that by doing this, it's actually going to make it pop a little bit. It's just going to give it a little bit more more depth and dimension. So I'm just following the natural brightness of the image, just going over a couple spots here and there. And you can take your time to do this. You can, you know, do as little or as much detail as you want. I'm not going to really go too far into it. I may just, you know, just go over certain areas here. I just want to give you guys kind of an idea on how to do this. And I'm just going kind of over the outlines and maybe make my brush a little bit bigger and go over like the outside where there's light, like the arms here. And then on the pants, you'll notice that it's lighter in certain areas. So if I go in the middle here and just brighten that up just a little bit here, then on the edge of the pants, just kind of make that bright spot there. And then you can even use this to, I'm going to bring my flow down to about 3%. You can even use this to brighten darker areas that you want a little bit brighter. So like on the knee here, I still want it in shadow, but I don't want it to be quite as dark. Same thing with this leg here. I still want it to be in shadow, but I don't want it to be as dark. And then I'll go over just the top here. Just kind of even that out. You can use this technique even to like even out wrinkles and stuff like that. We're not going to go over that today, but maybe I will do a tutorial on that as well. I tend to keep like natural creases, natural wrinkles. I keep those in there. I think it kind of just adds depth and dimension and all that good stuff. So I tend to try and keep it as natural as I can. Now, if they're, you know, big wrinkles from, you know, them wadding their shirt up and stuff like that, then yeah, I might take those out. But if they're just natural, just not creased wrinkles, I'll kind of leave those there. So after you get all of your dodging done, all of your brightening, the next step is you'll switch your brush around, and then you'll do all the darkening. So you'll darken it in some areas. So it's basically the same exact concept. You're just painting dark where there's already dark. So I'm going to hit X here, and then we're going to start right on the inside of the shirt here on the left hand side. And I'm just going to darken this down just a little bit, just in these areas here. And then same thing on this inside seam here, maybe a little bit over here, maybe a little bit underneath her scarf here. Darken that down. You're basically just adding dimension, like I said, with what's already there. You're not changing anything, you're just enhancing what is already there. I'm going to go over like the edge of her leg here, maybe darken that down a little bit, and it just kind of makes it pop a little bit more. And I think that's about it for that. So if I go before, after, before, and after, see how it just gives it just that little bit of extra dimension. We're going to go down here. I'm going to hit my selective color, and if you've watched my videos before, you probably already have this free preset here. I'm going to go to my color pop preset, and then I'm going to adjust this to taste for the whole image. So I'm looking at everything in the image here, and I can add more if I want, but I just want to get a base color layer here. So I'm going to go maybe around 40%. The biggest thing I'm looking at is her skin tone. I don't want to add too much color into the skin. I feel it just looks kind of weird if you do that. Like I said, we can add more color in other areas after we do this by just duplicating the layers. So I'm at 36% here, and I think that looks good for the overall image. So what I'll do next is I'll hit Control or Command J to duplicate the layer, and I'm actually going to go down here. Remember we made this this selection here. I'm going to hit Command, and I'm going to click on that selection there. And that's going to bring that selection back up. And then with your mask selected on the selective color copy that you just made, I'm going to hit Shift Command I, and that's going to invert the selection. So notice the marching ants on the outside as well. So that means that I have the background selected and not the model. So we did have the model selected, now we have the background selected. So what I'll do now that we have the background selected, I'll hit Shift Delete, and that's going to bring up our fill dialog box. I'm going to hit black, and I'm going to hit OK. So that basically just fills that with black. You can hit Command D to deselect. And then if I turn that on and off, you'll see that it's very, very subtle. Let me turn it up, crank it up a little bit. So I'll bring that back up to 100%. There's off, there's on. See how it's just selecting the subject? So I'm creating separation here by adding color just to the subject and not the background. When you add color, it also adds contrast, but remember I said I didn't want to add any more to her face. So what I'm going to do is, even though I already made a mask, I can modify that mask by painting with black, and I'm going to have my flow at 100%, and I'm just going to paint it completely off of her face. So now I have the original color that was underneath. So you can also, if you want, you can duplicate this again, and then you can adjust the opacity to whatever you want here, and again just kind of paint on certain areas. So I'm going to go about 50%, and I'm just going to hit Shift Delete and then fill out the whole thing with black, and then I will paint with 100% on all the red here because I want to really emphasize that red color. Okay. Alright, and I believe we are good there. So there's our before and after. Notice how I just kind of evened out the background and the exposure of the background and the exposure of my model. That's really what we were going for there. Alright, so I think we're finished here. I hope that helps you guys out. I appreciate everyone tuning in again. And please help me by liking this video, subscribing, and maybe even share it with someone else who may benefit from watching it. It'll definitely help me out. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.